The planet Valerian 5 had once been a beacon of light in the galaxy, a world of towering crystalline cities, vast gardens that shimmered under twin suns, and a civilization that had thrived for millennia without war. The Velari, known for their diplomacy and technological advancements, had long believed that peace was the highest form of civilization. But peace had not prepared them for the Dralic swarm. The swarm had no interest in diplomacy. It did not negotiate. It did not stop. It consumed. The Velari's fleets, designed for defensive combat, had been shredded in days. Their outer colonies had fallen in weeks. Now, the Dralics were approaching Valerian 5, the Velari homeworld, with no fleet left to stop them. The High Council of Valerian 5 gathered in their grand chamber, an elegant construct of translucent stone that gleamed in the dim light. Chancellor Rathos, an aged but wise leader, stood at the center of the room, his normally serene expression now carved with despair. "We have no options left," Rathos spoke, his voice heavy. "Our allies have turned their backs on us. The Galactic Accord refuses to intervene. We are alone." Across the room, Admiral Celis, the last surviving fleet commander, clenched her hands into trembling fists. "Then we must send the distress signal." A murmur rippled through the council. The Velari had never once asked for outside aid, believing their alliances and neutrality would protect them. Now, that illusion was shattered. Rathos hesitated. "If we do this, we do not control who will answer." That was the risk. The Velari were respected but not powerful. There were empires out there, ancient and ruthless, who might see their desperation as an opportunity. Some would ignore them. Some would come not to help, but to conquer. And then there was humanity. The Velari had long avoided contact with Earth and its colonies. The few reports they had painted a picture of a species unlike any other, violent, chaotic, unpredictable. Even the warlike Dracari Empire had respected certain galactic laws, but humanity followed no rules but its own. Rathos turned to the council. "We must send the signal. We have no choice." Admiral Celis hesitated, then gave the order. The distress beacon pulsed into the void, a final, desperate cry for salvation. For days, there was no response. Then an answer came. A single message, brief and foreboding. "Humanity has heard your call. We are coming." The council chamber fell silent. Some dared to feel hope. Others felt only fear. Because of all the species in the galaxy, humanity was the last one they ever wanted to arrive. The distress signal had been sent, cast like a desperate plea into the uncaring void. Valerian 5's finest minds had designed it to reach the widest possible audience, ensuring that any advanced species within range would hear their cry for help. But as the hours turned into days, no response came. The council chamber, once a place of composed diplomacy and careful deliberation, was now a hushed den of silent dread. Chancellor Rathos stood near the grand observation window, staring at the deep expanse of space beyond. His people had done all they could. Now, all that remained was waiting, and praying that someone, anyone, would answer. Or so they thought. It was on the 5th cycle after their distress call that the transmission arrived. A sharp, unnatural chime echoed through the chamber as the Velari's artificial intelligence systems intercepted an incoming message. Every council member turned toward the holodisplays, their elongated, silver-blue features reflecting the data streams as their systems decrypted the signal. It was short, far shorter than the Velari had expected. One simple line: "Humanity has heard your call. We are coming." The silence that followed was deafening. A shiver ran through Admiral Celis, the last surviving military commander of Valerian 5. She had stood against the Dralic swarm, had watched her fleet burn in the cold dark, had faced certain death. And yet, this message made her blood run colder than anything before. The Velari had hoped for the Galactic Accord, a coalition of elder species known for measured intervention. Or perhaps the Yelthari, whose powerful fleets had kept entire sectors stable for centuries. Even the Dracari, their age-old rivals, might have been preferable. but humanity. Rethos exhaled slowly, his translucent fingers tightening on the rail before him. Are we certain it was them? One of the council's senior xenodiplomats, a thin and cautious being named Varen, hesitated before responding. Cross-referencing linguistic markers, the syntax is unmistakably Terran. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. Humanity was an anomaly in the galactic order, an outlier species that had defied every expectation. While most spacefaring civilizations followed a predictable pattern of peaceful expansion, forming trade alliances and diplomatic accords, humanity had forged its own path, unconcerned with the norms of the stars. They had arrived in the galactic scene late, much later than the Velari and the other great powers, but their rise had been meteoric. In just a few centuries, they had claimed worlds, established colonies in impossible conditions, and perhaps most unsettling of all, fought wars where none were needed. There were whispers, even among the most warlike species, that humanity did not simply survive war. They thrived in it. And now, they were coming. The fear of the unknown. The council erupted into debate. We must resign the signal immediately, declared Eldar Vena, an elder diplomat with centuries of service. If humanity arrives on Valerian 5, we will not survive their presence. And what choice do we have? Celis snapped, slamming a clenched fist against the metal podium. Would you rather face the Drellics alone? The humans are unpredictable, Varen murmured, eyes scanning historical data on his holoscreen. They do not adhere to the accords. They do not act as we do. If they come, they may decide that our world is better in their hands than ours. Rethos listened in silence, his mind a storm of thoughts. The Velari had spent centuries avoiding the Terrans, dismissing them as a reckless young species with no sense of cosmic responsibility. They had assumed that humanity would collapse under its own volatility. Yet humanity had not collapsed. Instead, they had expanded, taken uncharted territories, pushed through black holes, and colonized death worlds that no other race would dare set foot upon. They were dangerous, but that danger might be the only thing that could stop the swarm. Chancellor Rethos straightened and raised a hand, commanding silence. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of a leader who knew his people were standing on the edge of extinction. We have already sent the call, he said. If we deny them now, they may see it as weakness, as insult, and that will be the end of us, even before the swarm arrives. The words settled over the chamber like a heavy shroud. None could refute them. Humanity had responded. And if there was one truth about Terrans that every species in the galaxy understood, it was this. When humans answered a call, they did not turn back. A shadow in the stars. The following hours were restless. The great cities of Valerian 5, their spires shimmering under twin moons, pulsed with tension. The streets, normally filled with the quiet hum of Valari citizens, were eerily empty as people gathered in their homes, whispering about what was to come. Military installations, what little remained, scanned the outer sectors relentlessly, searching for the first sign of approaching vessels. And then they saw it. The first disturbance in local space was subtle, an anomaly, a ripple in the fabric of reality itself, as something massive dropped from FTL. Then another, and another. The Valari's orbital sensors screamed warnings. Warp signatures, dozens of them, no hundreds. The humans had not sent a fleet. They had sent an armada. On the observation deck of Valerian 5's Central Defense Station, Admiral Celis felt a chill creep up her spine as she watched the first Terran warships emerge from the abyss. They were nothing like Velari vessels, where Velari ships were elegant, flowing with organic curves and ethereal luminescence. The human ships were jagged, brutal things. Dark steel, reinforced plating, armor upon armor, ships built not to impress, but to endure. And leading them, at the heart of the formation, was a leviathan unlike anything the Velari had ever seen. A flagship of monstrous scale, its hull scarred from battles past, its weapons bristling with unrelenting purpose. A single word marked its side in bold Terran script. RESOLUT. A transmission flickered through the Velari communication systems. The humans were hailing them. Admiral Celis hesitated only for a moment before responding. The screen blinked to life, revealing a human commander. He was not what they expected. Not a brutal warlord, not an unhinged barbarian, but cold, calculated, a being of war whose presence alone demanded respect. His eyes, sharp as a predator's, studied the Velari Council. Then, in a voice that held no fear, he spoke. Valerian 5, your war is now ours, and the fate of the galaxy would never be the same again. A hush fell over the Velari High Command as the transmission ended. The image of the human commander faded from the holoscreen, but his words lingered in the silence. Your war is now ours. Admiral Celis exhaled slowly, trying to steady her thoughts. The Velari had hoped for allies, but they had never truly expected anyone to come. And now that the humans had arrived, she wasn't sure if they had traded one nightmare for another. The human fleet filled the upper atmosphere like a swarm of metal leviathans. Their ships were unlike anything the Velari had ever seen, not sleek, not graceful, but utterly unforgiving. These were vessels forged in the crucible of war, designed with one singular purpose: to kill and never be killed in return. The Velari fleet, what little remained of it, was reduced to an insignificant presence compared to the armada now descending upon them. The sheer density of the human warships blotted out the stars, their engines rumbling through the void like the footsteps of an approaching god. Then, without ceremony, the largest of the human vessels, the RESOLUT, advanced toward Valerian 5. The planetary defense stations sent frantic transmissions. Dozens of Velari officers shouted at once over secured channels. They're moving into low orbit. We need to establish direct diplomatic contact. Do we allow them to land? Chancellor Rathos sat motionless, his mind warring between fear and necessity. These were not the merciful peacekeepers of the Galactic Accord. These were humans. If they had come, it meant they had deemed this war worthy of their involvement. And if humanity had decided to fight, then something far worse than the Drellics was about to unfold. Contact. The RESOLUT deployed landing craft like a sky of falling stars, descending toward the Velari capital. Celis and a contingent of high-ranking officials stood at the planetary landing platform, watching the human dropships cut through the atmosphere. Their engines roared against the wind as they touched down with military precision. The first craft's doors hissed open, revealing the figures within. They were huge. Even their exosuits carried the air of creatures born for war. Thick armor plating, reinforced power cores, and weapons that no Velari could ever hope to wield. Their movements were purposeful, disciplined, unshaken by the alien world they had arrived on. And at their head was the same man who had spoken through the transmission. A Terran admiral. He stepped forward, his movements measured, his expression unreadable. The Velari, so accustomed to reading body language and emotional cues, found nothing familiar in him. He was a closed book, his presence like a void of intent. Then he spoke. Chancellor Rathos. His voice was calm, not aggressive, but unwavering, like a force of nature that did not recognize fear. Rathos took a cautious step forward, his silver-blue features unreadable to the humans. Admiral, you came. You called, the human said simply. We answered. There was no preamble, no drawn-out formalities. Humans were not creatures of endless discussion. They had already decided that this war was worth fighting, and that meant they were prepared to end it. Celis stepped forward, her military instincts overriding her diplomatic caution. The Drellics are coming. We cannot stop them. Our fleets have fallen. Our defenses are failing. She hesitated, swallowing her pride. We need you. The human admiral studied her. A lesser species might have mistaken the pause for indecision, But Celis saw something else. Calculation. The humans had not yet committed their full strength. Not truly. Not until they had measured the enemy. Not until they had decided on the exact manner in which they would break them. Then the Admiral finally nodded. Then we begin now. The nature of human warfare. The Velari were not unaccustomed to war, but their approach had always been methodical, measured. Humans did not fight that way. When they made their move, it was a storm of precision and brutality. The first Drelix Vanguard fleet entered the system within 2 planetary cycles. The Velari had known they would come, but they had not expected the humans to attack first. Before the Drelix ships even had a chance to establish formation, the human fleet struck like a predator that had been waiting for the perfect moment. Velari command stations watched in stunned silence as Terran battle doctrine unfolded before their eyes. There were no defensive postures, no drawn-out engagements, only calculated destruction. Human vessels did not hesitate. They ripped into the Drelix with impossible speed, firing high-velocity kinetic rounds, railgun salvos, and directed energy weapons so powerful that they melted entire enemy formations in seconds. The Drelix had faced hundreds of species before. None had ever fought like this. Within minutes, their forward assault force was obliterated. Celis, watching from the Velari war room, could only whisper, "By the stars." It wasn't just the power of their weapons. It was the way they'd fought. The humans anticipated the enemy's responses, cutting off their escape routes before they even had a chance to react. Their ships moved in coordinated kill boxes, driving the enemy into traps before the Drelix even realized they had lost the battle. And when the last Drelix vessel tried to flee, a single human dreadnought locked onto it from across the battlefield, and in a single shot, erased it from existence. The war had barely begun, and humanity had already rewritten its rules. A warning to the stars. After the battle, Chancellor Rethos stood before the massive viewport of the Velari capital. The debris of the Drelix fleet still burned in the darkness beyond, the shattered remnants drifting like ghosts in the void. Beside him, the human admiral stood in silent observation. Finally, Rethos turned to him. "You won this battle in minutes." "What? What are you?" The admiral did not turn to face him. His eyes remained fixed on the battlefield, on the dead enemy ships, on the cold, endless void. And then, at last, he spoke. "We are humanity." His voice was quiet, steady, and we have done this before. The war was far from over. But for the first time since the Drelix had descended upon them, the Velari no longer feared death. Because now, they had something far more terrifying standing at their side. A species that did not lose, a species that did not retreat, a species that, once provoked, would never stop until their enemy was utterly destroyed. And for the first time in recorded history, the Drelix had something to fear. The battlefield was silent. The wreckage of the Drelix fleet drifted through the void, lifeless, the remnants of their once feared warships now little more than burning husks. The Velari had never seen anything like it. Battles were supposed to be prolonged struggles, wars of attrition where both sides bled until one yielded. But this was extermination. Admiral Celis gripped the console before her, watching as human warships maneuvered through the wreckage, scanning for any signs of survivors. There were none. The Drelix had been annihilated before they could even process the nature of their defeat. Beside her, Chancellor Rethos could only shake his head in disbelief. "They never stood a chance," he murmured. "The Drelix are predators. They have ruled the battlefield for centuries, and yet, against the humans." Celis exhaled, forcing herself to think like a soldier instead of a stunned observer. "It wasn't just their weapons," she said. "It was their tactics, the way they anticipated the Drelix moves before they even made them. The way they dictated the flow of battle so completely that the Drelix never even had a moment to counterattack." The Velari had always prided themselves on their advanced military strategy, their ability to predict enemy actions with cold efficiency. But the humans? They went beyond prediction. They didn't just react to the enemy's moves. They dictated what moves were even possible. The warning. The human admiral stood at the center of the Velari war room, surrounded by holographic displays of the battlefield. His officers moved with practiced efficiency, analyzing fleet movements, calculating enemy reinforcements, preparing for what came next. But as they worked, the admiral did something unexpected. He opened a direct transmission to the Drelix command. The Velari officers tensed. This was madness. The Drelix had never accepted negotiations. They had never feared anything enough to retreat. But the humans had no interest in negotiations. When the transmission connected, the image of a Drelix warlord appeared. A towering insectoid being with blade-like mandibles and blood-red eyes. It snarled, its voice an unnatural blend of hissing and guttural tones. Who dares? But the human admiral didn't let it finish. "This is Admiral Cole of the Terran Federation," he said, his voice calm, unshaken, unyielding. "I am speaking to whatever remains of your command structure." The Drelix warlord's mandibles clicked, bristling with barely restrained fury. "You think you have won something, human," it hissed. "You think this battle matters. We are the Drelix. We will send more. We will burn your fleets as we have burned 1,000 before you. You err. You misunderstand." Admiral Cole interrupted, his tone like steel. "I did not open this channel to negotiate. I did not open it to hear your threats. I opened it so you would understand exactly what is about to happen to your kind." The warlord froze. Cole continued, his eyes cold as the void. "You invaded this system thinking it belonged to prey. You believed you would conquer it as you have conquered others. That ends now." The human fleet shifted in the holographic display, not pulling back, not regrouping, advancing. "We are not here to defend the Velari," Cole said, his voice like a final verdict. "We are here to end you. Completely." For the first time in recorded history, a Drelix warlord hesitated. "You cannot destroy us," the creature spat. "We are eternal." Cole leaned forward. "You're already dead," he said. "You just don't know it yet." Then he cut the transmission, and the invasion of Drelix space began, the unleashing of humanity. The Velari had never known war like this. The humans did not fight for territory. They did not fight for resources. They fought for finality. As soon as the command was given, the Terran armada surged forward, diving into Drelix-occupied sectors with a ferocity that defied all logic. Human warships did not stop. They did not retreat. They hunted. Entire Drelix flotillas vanished in coordinated strikes. Strategic hubs were glass before their defenses even had time to react. Velari tacticians struggled to keep up with what they were witnessing. In every previous war, opposing fleets would clash, pull back, regroup, and clash again. Battles were slow, methodical, each side trying to gain an edge over the other. But the humans? They did not fight wars of attrition. They decapitated. The moment human forces identified the Drelix command structures, those locations were erased. When the Velari had fought the Drelix, they had spent years crippling their supply lines, targeting manufacturing hubs, weakening them over time. The humans did it in days. Within a single planetary cycle, 5 major Drelix war factories were annihilated. Within 2, their supply networks collapsed. By the 3rd, their empire was crumbling. And still, human warships pushed forward. No hesitation, no mercy. The Velari were no longer allies in this war. They were witnesses. They watched as humanity did what no species in the galaxy had ever dared to do. They weren't fighting the Drelix. They were erasing them. The Drelix's last stand. The final bastion of the Drelix Empire lay ahead. A fortress world, one that had never fallen in millennia of conquest. It was there that the Drelix gathered everything they had left. A desperate last stand against an enemy that had never once lost a battle. As the human fleet approached, Velari intelligence officers tried to prepare a strategy. They calculated losses, predicted outcomes, attempted to find a way to make the battle winnable. The humans ignored them. Cole stood aboard the RESOLOUT, staring at the final battlefield. "This is where they break," he said. "Not if. Not maybe. This is where we finish them." And then, with no further hesitation, he gave the order. "Burn it all." A universe that we'll never forget. The battle did not last hours. It lasted minutes. When it was over, when the final Drelix warship was reduced to nothing but burning debris, the Velari forces hovered in stunned silence. They had expected a long, drawn-out siege. The humans had simply ended it. The Drelix were gone. Not defeated, not crippled. Gone. Across the galaxy, other empires watched in horror. The Drelix had been feared for centuries. They had conquered countless species. And now, they were a footnote in history. The Velari Chancellor turned to Admiral Cole. "You just rewrote the balance of the galaxy," he said. Cole didn't respond immediately. He merely watched the battlefield, expression unreadable. Then, at last, he spoke. "No," he said, "we just reminded the galaxy why you never provoke humanity." And across the stars, the lesson was learned. Never again would anyone dare to ask, "How dangerous are the humans?" Because now, the galaxy knew the answer. The void was silent, not the peaceful silence of a star drifting in the vastness of space, but the eerie, hollow quiet of extinction. Where once the Drelix reigned, ruling with fear and brutality, there was now nothing. Their war fleets, gone. Their fortress worlds, burning cinders. Their leadership, erased. No empire had ever suffered such a fate so quickly, so absolutely. And across the galaxy, fear settled in. The universe reacts. Every major power had watched the war unfold. Some had cheered, delighted to see the Drelix fall. Others had remained silent, waiting to see if humanity could truly deliver on their unspoken threat. Now, as the final Drelix world burned, they understood. The humans had not merely defeated an empire. They had ended it. It was a concept that was almost unthinkable. Galactic wars typically lasted decades, sometimes centuries, fought with diplomacy, subterfuge, and slow attrition. Even the most brutal conflicts ended with a surrender, a treaty, or at the very least survivors. But humanity had left nothing. They had not offered terms. They had not entertained peace talks. They had waged war like it was an execution. For the first time in millennia, the great empires of the stars felt fear. The Velari's unsettling realization Chancellor Rethos sat in his private chamber aboard the Velari High Command Station, staring at the holographic display before him. It was a map of the former Drelix territories. Vast, sprawling, once filled with colonies, supply lines, and warships. Now, a graveyard. There was no power struggle for their remains, no scavengers daring to pick apart the scraps, no opportunistic warlords claiming former Drelix sectors, because human warships still lingered. Not in an occupying manner, but as silent sentinels. They had not taken the conquered worlds for themselves. They had simply destroyed everything that made them a threat, and left. It was an act that defied conventional strategy. Empires conquered for resources, for power, for influence. But humanity had conquered for vengeance. Rithos exhaled, trying to process it. The Velari had always viewed themselves as masters of strategy, of cold and calculated warfare. They had predicted the rise and fall of empires long before they happened, ensuring their own survival through meticulous planning. But nothing in their archives, nothing in their historical analyses, had ever accounted for a species like this. A species that did not fight for power, but for finality. A species that refused to stop until the enemy was not merely beaten, but erased from existence. And worse, a species that had never lost. Rethos leaned forward, activating a private transmission. "Get me Admiral Celis," he ordered. "Now." the unyielding might of Earth. Aboard the UTS Resolute, Admiral Cole stood before a series of data streams. Reports from every sector confirmed the same thing. The Dralics were finished. Their last remnants had attempted to flee beyond known space, but humanity had tracked them down, hunted them to the edges of the void, and silenced them forever. But the mission was not over. Because now, the galaxy was watching. Cole turned to his officers, his expression unreadable. "What's the current status of the Velari?" Commander Hale, his second-in-command, checked her display. "They're nervous," she said. "Very nervous. They wanted the Dralics gone, but I don't think they expected us to handle it this way." Cole exhaled. Of course they didn't. To the Velari, war was a game of calculated moves, a balance of force and diplomacy. To humanity, war was a statement. And the statement had been made. He tapped his console, bringing up a new set of data, and the rest of the galaxy. "Shaken," Hale said. "Most empires have gone silent. Their fleets are on high alert, but none are making moves. They don't know whether we intend to stop here or keep going." Cole smirked. "Good. Let them wonder." There was a long silence before Hale spoke again, quieter this time. "Sir, what happens now?" Cole's gaze didn't leave the screen. "We wait." "Wait for what?" "For them to make a mistake. A sudden offer." Admiral Celis arrived at the Velari High Command Station an hour later, her uniform crisp, but her expression weary. She had seen too much in the last few weeks, things she had never believed possible. She had fought wars her entire life. She had seen empires rise and fall. But she had never seen a species fight like the humans. Rithos gestured for her to sit. "We need to talk." Celis nodded. "About the humans?" "Yes," the Chancellor admitted. He ran a hand over his face. "We pushed them into this war. Celis, we thought we were playing them. Thought we were using them to solve our Dralics problem." Celis sighed. "And instead, we unleashed something far worse." Rithos was silent for a moment before he finally spoke. "I want to propose an alliance." Celis frowned. "With humanity?" "Yes." There was a long pause. Then Celis shook her head. "No." Rithos's eyes narrowed. "No? You don't form alliances with something you can't control," she said. "And right now, we don't even understand what we've unleashed." Rithos stared at her, but he could not argue. Because deep down, he knew she was right. The next move, as the dust settled over the remnants of the Dralics, as the universe struggled to comprehend what had just happened, one thing became clear. The balance of power had shifted forever. Humanity had been dismissed, underestimated, and ignored for too long. That would never happen again. Across the galaxy, warnings spread like wildfire. Do not provoke the Terrans. Do not cross them. Do not make the mistake the Dralics made. But there were always those who would not listen. Those who would test the limits of the impossible. And for them, humanity had only one response. Let them try. The stars had changed. Not physically, of course. They still burned with the same ancient light, still bathed their planets in warmth, still whispered to the void in the silence of space. But to those who ruled the galaxy, the stars no longer represented dominion, no longer served as symbols of empires. They were now watching, waiting, holding their breath. For in the wake of the Dralics' annihilation, a new fear had settled across the galaxy. A fear with a name. Humanity. An unspoken war begins. Across the stars, the great powers of the universe found themselves at an impasse. They had all seen it happen. They had watched the Dralics, an empire older than some suns, get wiped from existence as if it had never mattered at all. Their fleets had been superior. Their technology had been refined through centuries of conquest. Their forces had stretched across thousands of worlds. And none of it had saved them. Because humanity did not fight wars the way the galaxy did. The moment the Dralics had declared war, their fate had been sealed. Humanity had not sought terms. They had not demanded surrender. They had not even given the Drellics the chance to negotiate. They had simply erased them. It was not victory. It was a lesson. And now, the galaxy's rulers were scrambling. Some whispered of alliances, of forging pacts to contain humanity before they decided this war wasn't over. Others spoke of peace, of extending an olive branch before it was too late. And some, the foolish ones, dared to ask a dangerous question. Can they be stopped? The Velari's secret meeting. High above the capital world of the Velari Dominion, a hidden council gathered in a station cloaked beyond the reaches of known space. It was not a military council, nor a government assembly. It was something older, something that had survived every war, every uprising, every collapse of power throughout history. The High Circle. Chancellor Rithos sat at the center, watching as the others filed in. Admirals, intelligence directors, shadow operatives, figures that did not officially exist, but whose influence shaped the destinies of empires. The discussion was brief and to the point. Humanity had become a threat. Something must be done, spoke one of the senior strategists. His voice was calm, but the unease in the room was undeniable. We should have expected this, another murmured. We unleashed them. We underestimated their fury. Now we must decide how we proceed. Admiral Celis leaned forward, her expression unreadable. You think there is a way to control them? There was silence. Because that was the problem, wasn't it? Humanity was uncontrollable. They had no ruling dynasty to be manipulated, no council to bribe or blackmail, no single leader who could be coerced. Their people did not fear death. Their soldiers did not break under pressure. And worst of all, their vengeance had no limits. Rithos finally spoke, his voice heavy. The Drellics were a test case, a warning to the galaxy. He turned his gaze toward the others. We must ask ourselves one question. Will they stop here? Another long silence. Then Celis sighed. If we were in their place, would we? The answer was clear, and that terrified them. The Council of the Core Powers. The Velari were not the only ones afraid. Across the galaxy, the great empires convened in secret, forming what would later be called the Council of the Core Powers, a gathering of the most powerful civilizations, all of whom had realized the same terrible truth. The balance had been broken. The old ways of war, the careful diplomacy, the delicate power struggles, all of it had been shattered in an instant. Now, they were faced with a terrible choice: to act or to wait, to risk provoking humanity, or to pray that their wrath had been satisfied. One of the counselors, a representative of the ancient Zithan Empire, spoke first. We must consider the possibility of war. There was a ripple of discomfort throughout the chamber. A representative of the Celt Dominion shook his head. War? Against them? Have you lost your mind? Are we to sit idle while they build their strength? The Zithan representative countered. Do you not see what they have done? They have wiped an empire from existence. Not subjugated, not crippled, erased. We are witnessing the rise of something unnatural, something that does not fit within the rules of the galaxy, something that must be stopped. A deep, rumbling voice spoke from the far end of the chamber. Stopped. All eyes turned to the massive figure seated in the shadows. Grand Strategist Vornak of the Hegra Confederacy, one of the oldest war leaders in the galaxy, a creature who had lived through wars that predated entire star nations. You wish to stop them? Vornak asked, his voice like grinding stone. Then tell me, Zithan, how you propose to stop death itself. The words settled heavily in the chamber, because that was what it felt like. Like humanity had become death. A silent warning. Back on Earth, within the heart of the United Terran Command, the true architects of humanity's strategy watched as the galaxy shifted around them. They knew. They had expected this. The other empires were meeting in secret, whispering about containment, about defensive pacts, about preemptive strikes. It did not matter, because humanity had made their message clear. A final transmission had been sent out, broadcast across the stars, repeating a simple phrase in every known language. A phrase that was not a threat, not a challenge, but a statement of truth. You saw what happened to the Daleks. You saw what we are capable of. Do not test us. And for now, the galaxy listened. But in the shadows, new threats were emerging, because not everyone feared humanity. Some sought revenge, some sought destruction, and some, the most dangerous of all, sought to understand, to study, to learn, to become. And so, as humanity stood atop the ashes of an empire, believing they had earned their peace, they did not yet realize a simple truth. The war was not over. It had only just begun. The galaxy held its breath. In the aftermath of the Daleks' total obliteration, the great empires of the cosmos found themselves in a moment of terrifying clarity, a moment where they realized that everything they had known, everything they had built their civilizations upon, was no longer relevant. Humanity had changed the rules. And now, the galaxy faced a singular, agonizing question. Would they be next? The gathering of shadows, far beyond the reach of any known star maps, where dead suns hung frozen in the abyss and forgotten civilizations lay entombed in silence, a meeting was taking place. Not of kings, not of emperors, not of admirals or warlords, but of those who had no names. Those who operated from the shadows, whispering into the ears of rulers, shifting the course of history without ever being seen. They were called many things: the unseen, the silent hand, the architects of war. And now, for the first time in millennia, they had gathered to discuss one thing: humanity. A figure, cloaked in layers of shimmering quantum fabric, stepped forward. Their voice was processed, untraceable. The Daleks were fools. A murmuring of agreement rippled through the room. Their arrogance led to their extinction, another voice added. A third voice, this one colder, spoke from the shadows. Then tell me, what do we do with an enemy that does not warn, does not negotiate, does not stop until the very foundation of their foe is nothing but dust? There was silence, because no one had an answer. The silent fleet. Deep in the void, in the lawless sectors where no empire held power, where the dead ships of ancient wars still floated like steel corpses in an endless graveyard, something was moving. Ships that bore no insignia. Armadas built not for conquest, but for annihilation. An alliance forged in secrecy, pulling together fleets from every corner of the galaxy, not under the command of a single empire, but under the guidance of those who had ruled from the shadows for longer than any civilization had existed. This was not a fleet meant for battle. It was a fleet meant for eradication. A fleet meant to do what the Daleks could not. To break humanity before it became unstoppable. Their plan was simple. They would strike Earth itself. The warning humanity did not expect. On the outer edges of Sol's defense perimeter, the sensors blinked. For months, humanity had watched the stars, knowing that their enemies were preparing, waiting for the inevitable retaliation. But they had not expected this. The warning came not from their own intelligence networks, not from spies, nor from intercepted transmissions, but from an enemy. An old enemy. A single vessel, battered, its hull scorched with wounds from battles long past, drifted into range of the Terran Outer Defense Network. It bore the insignia of the Visari Syndicate, one of the oldest mercenary factions in the galaxy, one that had fought against humanity during their first encounters with the wider cosmos. And yet, here they were, delivering a message, not of hostility, but of caution. A transmission flickered to life. The face of an old, scarred Visari appeared, one who had once ordered the deaths of countless human soldiers, who had once sought to conquer Earth's colonies for wealth and power. His voice was weary. They are coming. Not for your fleets, not for your colonies, not to bargain, not to intimidate. They are coming to wipe you from existence. A pause, and they will fail. The transmission ended, and the ship self-destructed, as if the very act of warning humanity had sealed its fate. The first strike. It began in the dead of night, not with a fleet appearing in orbit, not with the blaring of alarms or the clash of warships, but with silence. Across a dozen Terran colonies, communications went dark. Satellites were cut off, power grids failed, defense systems were disabled before they could even register a threat. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was too late. The first wave was not an invasion. It was an execution. Entire cities vanished beneath the force of kinetic bombardments. Research stations were erased before they could send distress signals. Deep space outposts were left adrift, their crews suffocating in the cold void. This was not war. This was extermination. And yet, even as the galaxy's hidden hand sought to break humanity in a single night, they had made one terrible miscalculation. They had assumed that humanity would be caught off guard, that they would react with fear, that they would stagger, hesitate, crumble. But humanity had already prepared, because war was their element, because survival was in their blood, and because those who had come to destroy them had made one fatal mistake. They had taught humanity how to be merciless, the battle that would change everything. As the first attack struck, the counterattack was already underway. Earth's orbital command did not scramble in chaos. There were no panic transmissions, no desperate calls for reinforcements. Because the moment the silent fleet revealed itself, humanity had already won. Across the void, warships awoke. Not patrolling fleets, not standard planetary defenses, but the hidden forces humanity had kept in the darkness, preparing for the day the galaxy made its move. Experimental dreadnoughts, shielded from detection for years, powered up with the energy of 1,000 suns. Stealth cruisers, embedded in the very fabric of space-time, flickered into existence with weapons already locking onto their prey. And from the depths of Mars, where the oldest military secrets of humanity had been buried, something terrifying emerged. A ship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. A ship built not for war, but for extinction. Its name, Judgment. And as its engines roared to life, as its weapons came online, as its shadows spread across the battlefield, a single message was sent across the void. A message the galaxy would never forget. Your war has begun. Now see how it ends. The universe stood at the precipice. The silent fleet had come to erase humanity. Instead, they had awakened something far worse. Humanity did not panic. They did not beg for time. They did not negotiate. They retaliated. And the galaxy would never be the same. The first shot that shattered the illusion of victory. The silent fleet, built in secret, funded by a coalition of unseen powers, designed for absolute destruction, had believed itself unstoppable. They had infiltrated human space unseen. They had severed communication lines before the first strike. They had bombarded cities, eliminated defense stations, wiped out entire outposts in the darkness. But they had underestimated humanity's greatest strength: adaptation. And so, the moment the first missile was fired at Earth's surface, aimed at breaking the cradle of mankind itself, everything changed. The projectile never reached its target, because Judgment was waiting. The ship, the pinnacle of human warfare, was unlike anything the silent fleet had ever faced. It did not register on their sensors. It did not move like a conventional warship. And when it fired, it did not miss. The first counterattack was instantaneous. Beams of concentrated energy, refined through technologies the rest of the galaxy had not yet imagined, tore through space-time itself. Not lasers, not plasma bolts, but weapons designed to erase matter on a quantum level. Entire squadrons of the silent fleet vanished before they even realized they were under attack. There was no fire, no wreckage, just absence, a tear in the battlefield where once an armada had stood. The first shot had been fired, and humanity had drawn blood. The unleashing of humanity's true power. The war that followed was unlike any war the galaxy had ever seen. The Silent Fleet, an alliance of secret factions, warlords, and the most advanced empires, had expected a prolonged conflict. Instead, they got a massacre. Humanity had learned from every war they had ever fought. And now, they'd weaponize those lessons. Ships that could shift between dimensions, striking from places where time itself had no meaning. Missiles that bent gravity, piercing even the most impenetrable shields. Cyber warfare that turned enemy eye against itself, causing fleets to implode before ever facing human forces. And most terrifyingly, human soldiers. No longer were they just warriors. They were specters of war, enhanced beyond anything the galaxy could comprehend. Augmented, relentless, immune to fear. The Silent Fleet had come believing they could erase mankind. They had not expected to be hunted. The moment the galaxy realized humanity could not be stopped, the first phase of the war lasted days. Not months. Not years. Days. Entire armadas erased. Entire factions betrayed by their own ships, their own weapons, their own technology, turned against them by human ingenuity. Panic spread across the galaxy. The great empires that had remained neutral, that had watched from the sidelines, suddenly understood. There would be no stopping humanity now. Not with fleets. Not with diplomacy. Not with fear. Because the war was no longer about survival. It was about domination. The final transmission before the end. As the last remnants of the Silent Fleet burned, as the final warships were consumed in the inferno of human vengeance, a final message was sent across the galactic network. A broadcast from the human high command. No threats. No ultimatums. Just a single statement. We are done being hunted. Now, you will learn what it means to run. And the transmission ended. At that moment, the balance of the galaxy changed forever. The war was over. The age of humanity had begun, and no one would dare challenge them again.